Hi, and welcome back to our reading of The Red Lion by Maria Schepis. Now, it's been a little while, and the last time we met our protagonist, he was a young man just about to leave his harmonious home life with his parents after, for once, a good upbringing, where he had been initiated to a certain level into the mysteries, and now he had just met the Count of Saint Germain and was ready to go with Saint Germain to Paris. So we are about to meet them in their journey, and we will also meet Saint Germain and how he interacts with Casanova. And now Casanova, at the time, knew Saint Germain, that is true, and was obsessed with trying to figure out how he was putting on his charlatanism. Because Casanova was convinced that Saint Germain was a charlatan, because he was himself. But he could never crack the code. He could never see through what it was Saint Germain did, because Saint Germain wasn't a charlatan. He pulled it right out from source. So we will meet them a little bit. And as I'm about to start reading, it is almost Halloween here, and which makes me think about how our hero, almost through all his embodiments, has been living in a constant state of Halloween with astral hordes and entities and demons and gals and all these forces pulling on him, harassing him, and he hasn't been able to isolate them out unless, except in isolated cases. And now, in this third book of the book, the Phoenix soars. He's finally on his way to rise above it all and enter higher vibrations and higher initiations. So, we will go to chapter number 31. And it is called The First Messenger from the Past. I thoroughly enjoyed my journey with the witty and amiable Count Saint Germain. The Count's famous thoroughbreds drew our luxurious carriage, and inside were all kinds of ingenious mechanisms to add to our comfort. Our trip itself was so well organized that his own rested horses and servants awaited us at every relay. It was in Saint Germain's carriage that I first saw a drop-leaf table, a small refrigerator for food, a water tank, and a heating device that enabled Yidam, the Count's mute Tibetan servant, to make coffee or tea. There were even push-button sensors for incense that either refreshed or tranquilized with no after effects. "Do you like my little toys?" Saint Germain smiled at my bewilderment. They astound me," I admitted. Louis XV thought they were devilish, but he wanted them so much he tried to steal them. Really, this wizardry is just a little loan from the future. Such things will become commonplace. People will acquire these comforts only to find they do not solve their problems. The evolution of man is headed in that direction, but right now it is hard to believe it will ever come about. Nevertheless, the framework of life will expand alarmingly, and the classes will become better equalized. The masses will begin to live more like the privileged few and to share their problems. Aren't you talking about a revolution? Revolutions, he revised. Many of them, external and internal. They will erupt periodically for centuries. The Count stared pensively into the distance. The first will come soon, he added softly. Before we went to Paris, we spent a month in strictest seclusion in Ghent. Saint Germain never even set foot outside our quarters. I was his link with the outside world. The old town of Ghent seemed to have stagnated in time. Its ancient houses with their narrow windows, arcades and ornamental carvings, and the cobblestones underfoot reminded me of Nuremberg, where I had also walked with a magus. I was again serving the same man, of course, though he had a different body and face. But I was completely different from the persecuted, obsessed Hans Burgner. Saint Germain kept a strict diet during his seclusion and fasted periodically. I supervised the preparation of his meals, not because Yidam needed my oversight. He executed his master's thought commands perfectly, but to teach me about nutrition. The main ingredient in his menu was oat flour. Yidam used a small hand mill to grind it to varying consistencies. He didn't use much salt, but did much of his seasoning with honey, milk, and lemon. Everything was cooked in pure vegetable oil. Fresh butter and fruit completed the menu. I was glad to share this repast. I had become accustomed to such meals in my parents' home. I dwell on this to point out how much the old alchemists knew about the necessity of a proper diet and the importance of vitamins. They taught even them that diet was decisive in preventing or healing most diseases. 230 years before, Rochard had kept a vegetarian diet and prescribed the same for his patients. In addition to maintaining a strict diet, Saint Germain, like Paracelsus, Trismosan, Albertus Magnus, Sendivogius, and Rochard, used a medication that strengthened the human organism and improved its resistance, the essence of nature's healing power. This secret of regeneration they had gained from profound knowledge and intuition. I was only allowed to see the Count for 1 hour every evening. He was always serious and taciturn, very different from the worldly, vibrant cavalier. There was an abstract, noble simplicity about him. He was regenerating those energies that he must pour on the world so that a very few of the millions of possible seeds on the barren soil might take root. He would listen to my summary of his mail and dictate brief replies. These letters came from almost every important personality in Europe and brought him all the latest news, usually with requests for advice. Thus, he saw events before their birth and was sometimes able to change them. Unfortunately, not often enough to make the world picture a saner one. While we were in Ghent, Saint Germain intervened to give me a strange and important experience. One morning, 2 of our servants, one permanent and one temporary, were walking the Count's thoroughbreds in front of our lodgings. I was just coming back from my early morning walk, and I noticed a man eyeing the horses with approval. Soon he began striking up a conversation with the servants. He was a conspicuous man in foreign clothing, with an olive complexion, dark burning eyes, a large aquiline nose, and a strong jaw, obviously of Latin origin. I estimated that he was about 45 or 50, though his tall figure was still muscular and youthful. Yet, it wasn't his appearance that caught my attention. It was a certainty that I knew the man from somewhere and had forgotten his name. I stepped back under the arcade and watched his animated features and broad gestures. He was asking the servants what nobleman it was who owned such rare, beautiful animals. Our regular stable boy was too discreet to reply, but the other took it upon himself to declare that the horses were the property of the Count Saint Germain. He added further that the Count had been in residence for a month and would see no one despite many entreaties. The foreigner immediately responded eagerly, "Why, I know Saint Germain, know him well. Announce me, immediately, he'll see me." The servants, scared and apologetic, refused. I was annoyed by the importunity of this aggressive man, but I was more certain than ever that I knew him, and it worried me. "Well, I will write him." The man cut off their argument with the arrogant gesture of a man performing before an audience. And then I recognized him. Louis de la Tourzel, that drunken satyr who had been my father in my previous life before he got killed in a brothel brawl. I watched his retreating figure. He had kept the feline movements of his previous life. His body was obviously still merely a vessel of passion, but there was more intelligence and complexity in it. Saint Germain noticed my brooding immediately that evening. When he asked, I told him what had happened. Before I could even finish, a rock with a letter attached to it crashed through the window. That's just like him, I said resignedly. Somehow I still felt I had to apologize for him. I went over and picked up the note, which proved to be both aggressive and theatrical. His writing was bold and coarse, but the note was admittedly witty and original. Here's the note. My dear Count, you won't keep me from communicating with an old friend, even if you have a seven-headed dragon at the door. When would it be convenient for you to see another master of the art of living? I burn to shake your hand. I'll be around tomorrow evening to collect your answer in person. Your Casanova. The signature made me gasp with surprise. Casanova? Well, this is progress. No, Saint Germain contradicted quietly. Fulfillment. It is the logical end of a lifeline that is going in the wrong direction. It contains the decline within itself. He seems to be exaggerating when he calls you an old friend, I prompted, unable to resist the temptation to learn more about this enigma. There is such a thing as a one-sided friendship, Cornelius. I have run into him a few times on the stage where we both play a role. You obviously play thoroughly contrasting roles, I replied. We do. For that very reason, they are complementary. Like light and shadow, you mean? In the material world, one can't exist without the other. He arouses strange feelings in me, I admitted thoughtfully. I'd really like to do something for him. Repels me, but I pity him. I feel responsible for him just as if he were still my father. I'm ashamed of him, but he interests me. Are you going to receive him tomorrow? Saint Germain said nothing for a moment, staring at me steadily. I think I will have to, so you can understand him and get him out of your system. Cornelius, you need to realize that neither one of us can do anything for him right now. God himself does not interfere, but merely allows him to continue to live and experience. I awaited Casanova's visit with a troubled excitement I had not felt in a long time. The Count was once more the man of the world for the occasion. His dark suit and doublet bore jeweled buttons worth a fortune. His hair was powdered and a huge clear sapphire sparkled on his finger. Tonight, you will have the opportunity to understand something important, Cornelius. You can't become a master until you learn the real nature of things, including the law that a person can be reached only at his own level and only to the extent of his capacity. When there is no capacity to understand, you cannot force even the greatest and most wonderful treasures on a person. A prophet who keeps on preaching the word to a rock is undoubtedly a lunatic. Just then a servant came in and announced, Jacques de Casanova de Saint-Gall. Saint Germain stood up and went to greet his guest, while I remained in the background, a mere observer. I enjoyed the advantages of this position many times during the years I was with him. Scores of candles were burning in the room, but the window arch was shadowed, so I withdrew to watch this renowned and infamous man of whom so little was known and yet so much discussed. I was a part of his past, the past that was only a dim presentment to him. He had changed, a good deal. I don't mean his features, of course they were different, though it was easy to distinguish traits of Louis de la Tourzel. But Casanova's face was darker and more passionate, yet with more cunning and experience. He was debauched, but not a drunkard. His eyes glittered with intensity and distrust, the adventurer who sought and shaped his own destiny. There was just a trace of sardonic humor about him, a bitter, skeptical humor which was now only the ashes of fatigue, nausea, and old age. Yet it was a humanizing element by which his spirit had begun to grow. His exaggerated and expensive clothes invariably aroused antipathy in men, but you couldn't deny that the man had a presence. He maintained eye contact with whomever he was speaking, virtually leaning toward them physically and overwhelming them with the force of his voice. This technique swept over the weak and thoughtless of both sexes like a tidal wave. Saint Germain just smiled at Casanova's fulsome compliments and pledges of friendship. You were good enough to write, my friend, that we are both masters of the art of living. Why don't we put aside the flattery we both reserve for the seduction of the masses? Let us allow ourselves the luxury of pure frankness tonight. By God, there is a tempting offer. Casanova was enthusiastic. Dressing gown and slippers, then. My dear Casanova, complete nudity. The other man's face was perplexed. Then he hooded his eyes in watchful caution. As you will. Will you disrobe first? Naturally. Saint Germain replied sonorously as he bowed his guest to the table. Yidam appeared quietly with a heavily laden tray. He laid out rich, spicy dishes and poured Casanova some wine, leaving the Count's glass empty. Then he left silently. Help yourself, Saint Germain said cordially. You may want the strength for this unusual performance. I observe you are not eating the same food I am, Casanova remarked, and your glass is empty. What proof have I that Europe's greatest sorcerer doesn't wish to poison me? True, the Count nodded. I see you have begun to disrobe first after all, Cornelius. I stepped out of the window arch. My appearance definitely deflated Casanova. Startled, he just sat staring at me. Where the devil did he spring from? I have been here all along, sir. I spoke politely and bowed. Cornelius von Grotte, at your service. He is my famulus, my shadow, if you will, Saint Germain explained. You need take no note of him. He will remain, but not as a factor in our conversation. Cornelius, taste our friend's food and drink some of his wine. That won't be necessary. Casanova grabbed the glass and drained it in one draught. The Count had reckoned correctly, of course. I had been alarmed since I never took alcohol or meat, but a mere doubt of the man's death-defying bravado would make him take still greater risks for vanity's sake. I sat down at the table. Does it bother you to have Cornelius here? Saint Germain asked. No, why should it? There's just something damned strange. What do you mean? Casanova turned directly to me. Tell me, boy, haven't we met before? I looked at Saint Germain and he replied for me. You have, in a way. He was once the only legitimate son you ever had, Casanova, and not now, of course, but in a previous life. That is so, my lord, I affirmed. It was obvious that the man was greatly disquieted and did not want to admit it. Finally, he laughed aloud. Your imagination is unrivaled, Saint Germain. But why try your tricks on an old skeptic like me? You are wrong, my friend. I am being entirely honest. Then I will be too. I think this whole thing is a fraud, Casanova retorted crudely. But I will go along with it. Continue your disrobing. Where did you get that black cook? I brought him back from Tibet. And when were you in Tibet? 85 years ago. So that makes him... Yidam is 120 years old. 100 and... All right. How old are you? Ageless. fool, Casanova said. You are evading. Saint Germain replied, only by your narrow definition. But if you want to know, I have existed ever since the material world has existed. And you remember all this? Yes. All right. Tell me some nice gossip about Cleopatra. Saint Germain replied, I found her fairly commonplace. She was really just a muddled, lustful woman maddened by reflections of ancient glory, a cow resting on the throne of departed eagles. She had nothing in common with the real soul of Egypt or the ancient pharaoh priests who had possessed the great truth. Even her fabled beauty was exaggerated. She was no prettier than a young slave girl. It was only the splendor of her position that made her desirable. She was simply willful, incapable of the creative concentration that forms destiny. That's why she fell. Oh, come off it. You're interesting enough, but you're cheating. I deny that, Saint Germain said. I don't want to insult you, but I'm continuing to go naked. By all means. So, may I continue to question the conjurer? Of course. And you will answer anything and tell me all your secrets? I repeat, I will be frank. And what precisely do you mean by frankness? You spoke of secrets, Casanova. True, I have them, just as nature does, but disclosing them is not just a matter of desiring to. Nature keeps no secrets, you know. She answers all questions in her own language. To understand the answer, you must understand the language. So now, I'm stupid too? No, Saint Germain said. You are just a man who has studied different types of languages. A satisfied, lecherous smile stole over Casanova's face. Certainly, there are some languages I know very well indeed, but you speak them nearly as well as I do. Your mysterious ways are just as effective with women as my notorious reputation. I have envied you more than once, the way you can bring a shadow of youth back into the face of a woman who fears she is losing her charms. And why do you envy that? Because it's the key that opens every door. Perhaps so, but I have never used it as such. Casanova's eyes showed cynical scorn. You mean you're not interested in making love? I am interested in everything, even that. Then why your previous remark? Haven't you ever taken advantage of your opportunities? Casanova, perhaps I have used them differently than you have, but I've always been satisfied. Casanova laughed sarcastically. How about the ladies, my dear Count, were they satisfied? I think so. I was honored with their continued friendship, and, more important, they were grateful that they did not have to feel nausea and regret. Then they left your bed untouched, my friend. Untouched bodily, yes. So you celebrated a soul wedding with them? I would have thought that an impeccable cavalier like Saint Germain would be more afraid of ridicule than of feeding the host to a hungry woman. There, my dear Casanova, we come to one of the secrets it would be useless to explain to you. The only rapture you understand is the rapture of pleasure, which lasts only until the wick of the candle of the spinal column is used up. By the way, you had better start being thrifty with it. My ecstasy doesn't consume my energy. The longer it burns, the greater its vitality, and those with whom I share it never feel the fatigue of its burning out. I have heard the myth of eternal pleasure before, and I don't believe a word of it. I myself have gone through every hell and byway of pleasure, and I haven't found it. I have had dark, insatiable Asian bitches who had learned their art in the holy books and could prolong for hours what passes in seconds in the West. I've had Sappho's descendants in Greece who could make lovemaking a long, deadly ceremony of beauty. I've had Italian women right beside the bedrooms of their old husbands, and I've had Spanish women who wore their chastity like a fiery cross. I've known the cold and determined art of the French courtesans that is more maddening than all the others combined. But all the ecstasies led to fatigue, and the lamp of pleasure burnt out. There's simply no pleasure without the body, and the pleasure always ends sooner or later because the body's strength is finite. No, the body's strength is infinite, like any other force. It simply eludes those who don't know how to retain and renew it, retorted Saint Germain. You mean your famous nostrum, the ether? Partially. That, of course, is only a symbol of the universal spirit. Ah, would you show me some? Certainly. To my surprise, Saint Germain rose, took a carefully sealed crystal vial from his cabinet, and handed it to Casanova, who took it eagerly. There was a milky fluid in the vial that glistened and tilted with the movement of the bottle. This fluid, like the human body, contains condensed, undiscovered forces, the Count explained quietly. You can see it and weigh it, shake it a bit, and let the light shine through it. I warn you, though, if you or anybody else who does not know the secret should desire it, it will vanish like vapor right before his eyes. Do you believe me? No. Well, here's a pin, puncture the wax. If you can swallow just a single drop of that fluid, you will renew your virility for years. Casanova grasped the pin, impatiently punctured the wax, and held the vial next to the candle. The light shone through the transparent crystal of the milky fluid. There was no sign. What happened to it? He burst out. What happens to the energy of youth? Where is the vigor of our seeds scattered in dreams? What happens to life in an instant when it flows from the bloody stump of a severed head? How should I know? I can ask unanswerable questions as well as you can. But the answer is in your very hand. You just don't understand its language. You need not rub it in me. I believe in what I can see, feel, touch, and comprehend in this world. I have no inclination to go back to the school bench. But I must confess that this idea of rejuvenated virility strikes close to home. I don't know the secret of it. You say you do. Then allow some of your vanishing ether to enter my system, and I'll be eternally grateful to you for lengthening the one thing that means anything to me. I cannot do it, my friend. It would merely delay your growth. But I will be glad to heal your gout. 15 of my pills will heal your pain in 3 days, and you'll regain your elasticity. To hell with your pills, Casanova exploded rudely. There is a catch to them, just like your rejuvenating medicine. Then you would explain that they didn't work because I thought of a limping jackass when I took them. Show me some material results, something I can touch like a wine goblet or a woman. Give me something that warms me and gives me energy, something I can taste before devouring. Do you have a large silver coin? Saint Germain cut in smoothly. As it happens, I do. Why? Lend it to me a while, and I promise you it will bring you interest before you leave this room. Casanova handed him a silver 12-sou piece. Immediately the door opened and Yidam brought in a portable iron furnace. He put a thin sheet of steel on the floor, placed the furnace down on top of it, and set about making up the fire. Excellent teamwork, Casanova applauded ironically. You've got it down pat. Your mute servant enters at exactly the right moment and carries out your pre-arranged orders. I gave Yidam the orders in your presence, Saint Germain replied simply. How? I didn't hear anything. But Yidam did. He hears differently than you do, for he knows the language. Why do you keep saying that? To make me feel stupid? I have not repeated myself. I'm just stating facts, Casanova. Anyone can learn what he does not know if he wants to, and has the interest to persevere. Well, I don't. Furthermore, I don't believe there is anything to learn. I've no desire to be considered a Superman as you do. I know. You don't believe that there is anything to believe or that I can tempt you. That's all right. Would you like to examine this crucible before I close it? He passed it over to Casanova, who turned it upside down and then tapped its sides inch by inch with his ring. Then Saint Germain put the 12-sou piece into it, fastened the lid, and put the crucible on the fire. Yidam turned the sandglass on the table. Casanova and Saint Germain watched him silently as he performed his tasks. The room was silent, save for the hiss of the bellows, yet it was filled with the sound of Casanova's nervous restlessness. I could see his dense waves of protest and instinctive resistance swirling around Saint Germain, who stood watching the fire with crossed arms. The last grain of sand dripped to the bottom of the glass. Yidam nodded and set aside the bellows, then unscrewed the lid of the crucible with wooden pliers. Saint Germain held his hand over it and dropped in a soft ball of wax. Then Yidam replaced the lid, turned the sandals, and applied himself again to the bellows. The heat grew almost unbearable, just as it once had in the workshop of Anton Bruggendorf. But Casanova would not budge from his seat beside the furnace. The heavy meal and his conflicting emotions added to the heat he was feeling, and beads of sweat glistened from under his wig. His face was flushed, and I could see a nerve beating in his forehead. At last the time was up. Yidam opened the crucible, then submerged it in water. The pure yellow gold was cooled in minutes, and Saint Germain pried it loose and handed it to Casanova. Have it examined by a goldsmith tomorrow. Get him to weigh a 12-sou silver piece and compare weights. I promised you it would be equal. But now Casanova's blind temper erupted. It is a cheat! Just a mean, ordinary cheat! He almost choked on his hatred. I stood there and watched you smuggle the gold into the crucible. Saint Germain remained impassive. I believe that after that it is unnecessary for us to continue this evening. He bowed slightly, and Yidam opened the door. Casanova threw down the gold, flung on his cloak, and stormed down the stairs. We could hear him cursing on the way down. Lousy hypocrites, trying to cheat me! Conceited charlatan! His voice faded into the night. I turned back to Saint Germain, who was opening the window to clear the dense hostile odors with the cool autumn air. Yidam had already left. I quietly extinguished the candles until only one was left burning. Then I went to the window and thanked the Count for the mystery he had showed me. That is the end of chapter 31, and the next one is called Paris, 1780.